Ajani village was a place where life was simple, and traditions held the people together like strong roots in the earth. The villagers shared what they had and worked together, bound by the belief that no one should suffer alone. Peace thrived here, nurtured by unity and the wisdom of their elders. Kwame, a hard-working farmer, lived on the edge of the village with his wife, Abina, and their 2 children. His land was dry and unyielding, filled with rocks that resisted his every effort to grow crops. Day after day, he toiled under the sun, hoping for a harvest that would sustain his family. His calloused hands and furrowed brow told the story of years spent battling the earth, yet he remained determined. One morning, as Kwame dug through the stubborn soil, his hoe struck something unusual. Curious, he knelt and brushed the dirt away. Beneath the surface, a glimmering stone caught the light. His heart raced as he unearthed more of the glittering vein. "Gold," he whispered, disbelief and excitement warring within him. For a moment, he let himself dream of what this could mean. A better life for his family, free from struggle. But just as quickly, fear crept in. What if the villagers found out? He had seen how greed could poison even the closest of bonds. Kwame decided to keep the discovery to himself, burying the secret as deeply as the gold had been hidden. That evening, Abina watched her husband closely. "Kwame, something is troubling you," she said. "I see it in your eyes." He hesitated but finally told her. Abina gasped, her eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and dread. "This could change everything for us," she said, her voice trembling. "But the village, if they know, it will bring trouble. People do not share dreams lightly when gold is involved." Kwame nodded, his shoulders heavy with the weight of her words. "We will say nothing, for now," he decided, though doubt gnawed at him. As the days passed, the secret began to take its toll. Kwame's silence grew heavier, and his once peaceful mind churned with anxiety. He avoided the curious eyes of his neighbors, especially Amma, the sharp-tongued woman who seemed to notice everything. He worried about what would happen if the truth came to light. Would the village demand the gold? Would it tear apart the harmony they cherished? Abena tried to comfort him, but even she could not quell the unease growing between them. "What will you do when they ask why you are no longer struggling?" she asked one night. "Secrets cannot remain buried forever." Kwame had no answer. He sat in silence, staring at the darkened horizon, as if searching for guidance from the ancestors. He knew the gold could bring his family a brighter future, but at what cost? As the weight of his secret grew, so did the shadow it cast over his life. And so, the seeds of conflict were sown, hidden beneath the surface like the gold itself, waiting to be unearthed. The harmony of Ajani village, once unshakable, now hung by a thread, stretched taut between dreams of prosperity and the fear of destruction. Kwame worked tirelessly, his shoulders hunched from years of toil. Yet, the once bustling rhythm of his work now felt hesitant. He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the village that stretched out in the distance. The secret buried in his backyard weighed heavily on his soul. He began avoiding the village paths and lingering conversations, retreating deeper into his thoughts. Amma, his sharp-eyed neighbor, stood outside her hut, pounding millet in a rhythmic motion. Her gaze flickered toward Kwame's house, narrowing as she noticed his unusual silence. "Kwame," she muttered to herself, "what is it that keeps your spirit so restless?" She began to watch him closely, noting every hurried movement and furtive glance. What does that mean? Days passed, and Amma's suspicions grew. There is something he hides, she said to her friends as they gathered by the village well. Her voice carried a tone of intrigue, her words like embers sparking curiosity. I have seen the way he avoids us, as though his shadow carries a secret. Whispers spread like wildfire, carried by the wind into every hut and corner of the village. What has Kwame found? One villager asked. Why does he no longer join us at the market? Perhaps he has discovered riches, another speculated. Gold, maybe. He keeps to himself, plotting how to keep it from us. The murmurs of discontent reached Baba Adewole, the village elder, who called for a council meeting. The gathering took place under the ancient baobab tree, its gnarled branches stretching toward the sky as though bearing witness to the proceedings. Villagers arrived, their faces etched with anticipation and unease. Kwame stood before the council, his brow furrowed but his stance firm. Baba Adewale, his voice steady and wise, addressed the gathering. My children, I have heard troubling words of division. The ancestors taught us that our strength lies in unity. Greed is a flame that can consume even the strongest village. Kwame stepped forward. Elder, he began, his voice trembling but resolute. I have toiled on my land for years, enduring hardship so my family might survive. What I have found is not the village's burden to bear. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others muttering dissent. The land belongs to us all, one villager said. Whatever lies beneath it must be shared. Baba Adewale raised his hand, silencing the crowd. We must tread carefully, for greed will tear us apart. Kwame, consider the good of the village. And you, my children, remember that wealth cannot replace harmony. As the council deliberated, Kwame's brother Kojo stood silently at the edge of the crowd. His heart burned with resentment. He forgets who stood by him during his struggles, Kojo thought. Why should he keep this wealth to himself? The bitterness festered, driving Kojo to seek allies outside the village. A week later, Kwame's worst fears began to take shape. He noticed strangers lurking near his land, their intentions clear in the way their eyes lingered on the soil. Confronting Kojo, Kwame demanded, What have you done? Did you bring outsiders into our home? Kojo's expression was defiant. You left me no choice, he spat. You hoard riches while your family struggles. Is this the brother I grew up with? Kwame's anger boiled over, but his words caught in his throat. Betrayal hung thick in the air, splitting the bond they once shared. At night, Kwame's sleep was haunted by dreams of his land being ripped apart, the gold exposed, and his family left with nothing. He would wake in a sweat, Abena's concerned eyes watching him. Kwame, she said softly, this gold will destroy us if you let it. Share it with the village. Show them you are not their enemy. Kwame shook his head. They will never stop at a portion, Abena. They will take it all. What will we have left? Abena touched his hand. What is left of a man who has no peace, Kwame? Think of the children. Think of your ancestors. They did not teach us to hoard, but to live in harmony. Kwame stared at the ground, the weight of her words pressing against his resolve. He knew she spoke the truth, but fear clung to him like a shadow, whispering that the gold could save his family or ruin them forever. The night was eerily silent, the kind of silence that made the air feel heavy. Kwame sat by the faint glow of his lantern, his heart uneasy. He had felt the tension brewing in the village, the weight of watchful eyes pressing against him even when no one was near. Suddenly, the distant crunch of footsteps reached his ears. He froze, the sound growing louder, more deliberate. He stepped outside, gripping a wooden staff, and saw them. Figures cloaked in darkness, faces hidden behind masks. "Kwame!" A voice bellowed from the group. "We know what you've hidden. It does not belong to you alone. Open your doors and let us see the gold." Kwame's hands trembled, but his voice rose with defiance. "This land is mine, and what it yields is mine. You have no right to demand what you did not work for." The crowd murmured angrily. Shadows flickered in the lamplight, their bodies tense with the threat of violence. "You defy us?" another voice growled. "Your greed will bring ruin to this village." "I protect what is mine," Kwame shouted back, though fear crept into his voice. The standoff seemed ready to erupt when a deep, commanding voice cut through the chaos. "Stop this madness!" Baba Adewale appeared, his staff striking the ground with a resonant thud. His presence alone seemed to calm the storm. The villagers stepped back, murmuring among themselves. "Have we fallen so low," Baba Adewale began, his voice steady and strong, "that we allow greed to turn us into animals? This is not the way of our ancestors. We resolve disputes with wisdom, not violence." The mob hesitated, their anger subsiding under the elder's gaze. Slowly, they dispersed, leaving Kwame standing in the doorway of his home, his chest heaving with relief. But the damage had been done. The hostility in their eyes had left a scar on his heart. The next day, whispers continued to swirl, and Kwame found himself face to face with the truth he dreaded most. It was Kojo, his own brother, who had roused the villagers against him. When confronted, Kojo did not deny it. "You hoard riches while the rest of us suffer," Kojo said bitterly. "You have forgotten your family." "Family?" Kwame spat, his voice rising with anger. "Would a brother bring strangers to my door in the dead of night? Would he turn my neighbors against me?" "I only did what you refused to do," Kojo snapped. "Share what is not yours to keep." Their argument grew heated, spilling out into the village square, where a crowd began to gather. Villagers whispered among themselves, the tension palpable. Baba Adewale stepped forward once more, his face lined with disappointment. "Look at yourselves," the elder said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "Brothers tearing each other apart. Do you think this gold will bring peace? It will not. It will bring ruin." His words hung in the air like a storm cloud. The villagers shifted uneasily, guilt weighing on them as they looked at the two brothers, whose anger had laid bare the fractures in their community. The storm broke a week later, not in the form of rain, but in the arrival of strangers, men with machines. Summoned by Kojo in his bitterness, they came to claim the gold, digging into the land with no regard for the sacred soil or the lives it sustained. The once vibrant backyard became a barren wasteland, its beauty stripped away. Kojo watched in horror as the destruction unfolded, regret clawing at his chest. "What have I done?" he whispered, his voice trembling. In an act of redemption, Kojo approached the strangers, pleading with them to leave. When words failed, he stood in their path, blocking their machines with his body. A struggle ensued, and Kojo was gravely injured, his blood staining the very earth he had sought to protect. The sight of Kojo's sacrifice brought the villagers to their senses. They gathered around him, their anger replaced by grief and shame. Baba Adewale knelt beside Kojo, his hand resting gently on the injured man's shoulder. "Let his pain be a lesson to us all," Baba Adewole said, his voice thick with emotion. "Greed has brought us nothing but sorrow. Let us honor Kojo's sacrifice by healing what we have broken." In their shared mourning, the villagers found unity once more. They vowed to restore what had been lost, working together to heal the land and rebuild their community. The gold, which had once divided them, became a lesson etched in their hearts, a reminder of the cost of greed and the strength of unity. Kwame sat by Kojo's bedside, his heart heavy with the weight of recent events. Kojo's breaths were shallow, his wounds a reminder of how greed had torn them apart. Kwame's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he reached for his brother's hand. "Kojo," Kwame said softly, his voice trembling. "I let my pride blind me. I should have shared more. I should have seen your pain." Kojo's eyelids fluttered open, his face pale but his gaze steady. "No, Kwame," he whispered. "It was I who let jealousy consume me. I betrayed you, my own brother." Kwame shook his head, his grip on Kojo's hand tightening. "We both lost sight of what matters, our family, our bond. Can you forgive me?" Kojo's lips curved into a faint smile. "Only if you can forgive me too." The brothers embraced, their tears mingling with the dust of the land they had fought over. Around them, the villagers watched silently, their hearts stirred by the sight of the two men mending what greed had broken. The next day, Kwame and Kojo stood together before the council. Baba Adewole leaned on his staff, his wise eyes scanning the gathered villagers. "Speak, my sons," he said, his voice calm yet commanding. "What have you decided?" Kwame stepped forward, his voice firm. "We have wronged this village with our division, but the gold must now serve a greater purpose. Let it build a future for all of us." The villagers murmured in agreement as Kojo added, "A school, a clinic, a well. Let these be the legacy of the gold, not the ruin it nearly brought." Baba Adewole nodded, his face serene. "It is good to see wisdom prevail. Remember, my children, that wealth can divide or unite. The choice is always ours." As the villagers dispersed, Baba Adewole gathered them under the baobab tree to share a story. "There was once a farmer," he began, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "He discovered treasure beneath his land, but he hid it from his family. In his greed, he trusted no one, and in the end, he was left with neither family nor treasure. Let us not follow his path." The story lingered in the minds of the villagers, its lesson clear. They turned their efforts to rebuilding, united in purpose. Kwame's backyard, once a battlefield of greed, was transformed into a communal garden. Rows of maize and cassava stretched toward the sky, tended by hands that now worked in harmony. One morning, Kwame stood with Abena and their children beneath the shade of the baobab tree. In his hands, he held a sapling. Together, they planted it in the garden, its roots finding purchase in the same soil where gold had once lain. "This tree," Kwame said, "will remind us of what we have learned. Its roots will bind us, and its branches will shade our children." As the tree grew, its leaves whispered to the wind, carrying a message of resilience and unity. The village flourished, and the lessons of the past became the foundation of their future. The tree stood tall, a living testament to the power of forgiveness, the strength of family, and the enduring value of community. The discovery of gold had seemed like a blessing, but it quickly turned into a curse. Kwame, once a humble and respected man, watched as the glimmer of wealth clouded his judgment and poisoned his relationships. The gold, though buried in the earth, had a way of surfacing in whispers and suspicions. Neighbors who once greeted him warmly now spoke of him in hushed tones, their envy turning to anger. The unity of the village, as strong as the ancient baobab tree, began to crack under the weight of greed. Kwame sat alone in his yard, staring at the ground that had given him both hope and despair. "What have I done?" he muttered to himself. "I wanted to protect my family, but instead, I have brought division." The realization hit him like a storm, and he lowered his head, the burden of his choices pressing heavily on his shoulders. The lesson was clear. Wealth without wisdom destroys even the strongest bonds. When the betrayal of his brother, Kojo, came to light, the pain was almost unbearable. "You were my blood, Kojo," Kwame said, his voice breaking. "How could you sell me out for riches?" Kojo, his face shadowed with regret, replied, "I let jealousy blind me. I thought the gold would give me what I felt you had taken, but it gave me nothing but shame." Kwame hesitated, his anger battling with a deeper sense of loss. "You are my brother," he said at last, his voice steady. "If I hold on to this anger, it will destroy me, just as the gold nearly destroyed us both. I forgive you, Kojo, but let us never forget what this greed has cost us." Their embrace was watched by the villagers, who began to see the truth in their elders' teachings. Baba Adewole spoke softly, his words carrying the weight of wisdom. "The land gave us gold, but we turned it into a weapon. It is time to heal, to use this gift for the good of all." The villagers, moved by the brothers' reconciliation, came together to plan how the remaining gold could be used. "We will build a school for our children," said one villager. "And a clinic for our sick," added another. Kwame, for the first time in weeks, felt a sense of peace as he saw his neighbors united in purpose. The gold that had once divided them now became the foundation for a brighter future. As the projects took shape, Baba Adewole gathered the villagers under the baobab tree. "Let me tell you a story," he began, his voice low and deliberate. "There was once a farmer who discovered treasure hidden beneath his land. At first, he kept it secret, but as the gold consumed his thoughts, he turned away from his family and friends. When the treasure was stolen, he was left with nothing, not even the love of those he once cared for. Let us not be like that farmer. Let us remember that no treasure is worth more than the bonds we share." The story lingered in the villagers' minds as they worked together to rebuild their community. Kwame's family, once fractured, began to heal. Abena tended the communal garden, her children playing nearby. The land, once a source of conflict, now bore fruit that nourished everyone. One day, Kwame stood with a sapling in his hands. "This tree will remind us of what we have learned," he said. He planted it in the center of the garden, its roots digging deep into the soil that had seen both despair and hope. As the tree grew, its branches stretched toward the sky, a symbol of resilience and unity. It became a gathering place for the villagers, who told their children stories of the time the gold was found and how the village came together to overcome its curse. The lesson was clear. Wealth may fade, but the bonds of family, community, and tradition are eternal. Under the shade of the growing tree, the village of Ajani thrived, its people forever reminded of the power of unity and the strength of forgiveness.